Hello, this is Carol Lundeen of Garden 911. I help people create and maintain healthy landscape habitats for kids, pets, and pollinators. Well, it's early March and spring fever is here. Yesterday, the red-winged blackbirds arrived in my neighborhood. You know, when you own a home, you own an ecosystem. That is your yard. So I'd like to give you a few tips today about what you can do in your landscape in March. It's a great time of year to prune some but not all shrubs. The first thing to do with pruning is to remove any dead or damaged branches. And then it's really important to properly identify what you want to prune, because shrubs that bloom in the spring already have formed their flower buds. They did that last year. So if you go ahead and prune those branches, you're probably going to be cutting away your flower buds. And that probably won't damage the plant, but it may disappoint you or surprise you because you have a lot less flowers this year than last year. Shrubs that bloom in the summer, most of those are creating this year's flower buds this year. So it's okay to prune them more than you would the spring bloomers. So I wanted to give you an example of the importance of knowing what you're doing when it comes to identifying your plants. So hydrangeas confuse a lot of people. Here's a couple of examples of hydrangea. This is the Hydrangea macrophylla. It's the big mop head that's popular on the Cape and Vineyard and Nantucket. They seem to do extremely well there. But the last few years, they have not done well here at all. A lot of their terminal buds, this is the flower bud at the tip of the stem, a lot of these get damaged in the winter and they are really failing and taking up space and not really hard working. On the other hand, this is a Hydrangea arborescence. Limelight is one of the cultivars you may know. So this doesn't bloom till later in the year, and this doesn't create its flower buds until later this year. So this hydrangea, you could cut it to the ground and you would still get new growth and lots of flowers this year. So the other thing to do this time of year is to divide perennials, because again, you want to properly identify everything. But generally, I like to take a flat-bottomed transplanting shovel and cut the perennial into maybe squares, in pieces about this big. And then I take them and put them into different spots in the garden, or I give them to a friend. However, some perennials don't like to be moved ever at all. And those are perennials that tend to have taproots, which can be things like the milkweeds, like butterfly weed, swamp milkweed, and things like your false blue indigo, which is a terrific native plant. It's the kind of thing you want to be sure when you first plant it that that's where you want it for life. Third to do in March is to look after your weeds and invasive plants. Invasive have an advantage because they have a longer growing season than many native plants. Their buds start to swell and they put up leaves earlier than many native plants. And there are some invasive weeds that have been blooming all winter. And you sure don't want those blooms to turn into seeds, because you know where seeds leave. So here's some don'ts. One thing you don't want to do as you're going around pruning and dividing your perennials and managing your invasives and weeds, you do not want to step on wet soil. It's been very wet this winter and early spring, and the soil is really squishy, and you don't want to walk on it. That's because when you walk on it, you compress the soil. You damage the soil structure, and you make an anaerobic condition, and you may be stepping on roots. So the roots are not getting the oxygen that they need, a bad thing for plants. The second don't you want to do is if you have a lot of leaves in your beds, you don't want to disturb those. And that's because those leaves are a tremendous habitat for great numbers of pollinators that are spending part of their life cycle in your leaves. An oak tree supports 500-something species of native butterflies and moths. And when those leaves come down in the fall, they are the overwintering habitat for caterpillars that either roll themselves up in leaves or they tunnel under the ground under those leaves and they spend the winter there. So if you disturb their habitat, you're disturbing their lives. So I really encourage you to leave the leaves alone. Another thing not to do is to cut down the stems of your perennials from last year. Like the leaves, many insects overwinter in the stems of your perennials are there. So thank you for watching. This is Carol Lundeen of Garden 911 at garden-911.com, and here's to healthy landscapes.